Reena Kallat, welcome to Lunuganga, celebrating 75 years of really one of the most special gardens in the world. Reena, tell us what made you think of this work?
Suhanya, this is such an honor to be here, really, to experience this place, which of course I did many years ago. And when I was given this wonderful invitation, the first thing that really came to my mind from my last visit here was the sort of, the sort of concealment of the separation within the garden that Geoffrey had, by growing the bush over it and concealing the sort of rupture, the separation. And that somehow really resonated with me the strongest because, for years I have been working with artificially constructed lines that, of course, as an artist, the line is such an integral part of an artist's toolkit, and when drawn across territory has such implications for people on either side, but also how lines, these sort of often arbitrarily drawn national borders are then sort of reclaimed here. So this piece is really formed by national borders that are, of course, contested over their over the sharing of their river waters, and the fact that it kind of forms this sort of fluid geography is this, speaking of the porosity of these borders, of how, what I'm really hoping to see is how this will be sort of reclaimed with the grass growing.
Yeah. Geoffrey always said, the strength of nature is it's so foundational. If you just left it, the jungle will just take over. And so then that relationship between nature and the hand of architect or artist or culture is mutable and something we celebrate. This is a beautiful example of that, but it's all in such fine balance, isn't it? We're seeing the monkeys right now jumping in the trees. We know that there'll be, maybe pigs coming here at night. Who knows?
Yeah.
And then the grass itself will start to think about how it works. This line, it's a beautiful work. It's like what a canvas to be able to explore.
And then to see this sort of, go and form a sort of relationship with the resonance of the water there, and the flow and the change and the sort of dynamism of the form itself. And
it's lovely. It's interesting also how, lines like the branches have that sort of similar sense of the sinuousness of these lines are mirrored in those sorts of lines as well. When you see that beautiful branch and the way it works, see this.
that's really, every life form has those patterns that are self-replicating, that sort of originate and then to sustain. I think that's what I find really mirrors the idea that how life really grows, and to live and to sustain, it just sort of restores the balance and fills in for things that are broken, that are disjointed. The more obvious ones, which were to do directly with the river, which of course in this case we have shifting ecotones, which is really about, one's thinking of these long shared histories, and yet how humans have continued to shape geography. So the sort of invisible hand at play, reorganizing, reshaping. And I mean, we know that, whether it's through hydroelectric projects, through dam projects, I mean, what humans have done to the landscape as such. And so yes, this was, I think, a more obvious choice to have brought together.
The beautiful piece that uses the idea of a thumbprint, which when I saw, I thought was actually an imprint of the brain, when actually they are also rivers. They are the shape of rivers.
They are the borders that where rivers intersect. So I mean, the fact that the artificial line and the natural lines of rivers intersect. But again, it's the sort of same ideas in a way where it's sort of reclaiming it into another form where these lines of division get sort of absorbed and dissolve into forming a vortex.
And that fits in with this piece here as well, with the water boat.
Yeah, I mean, and then I really started to think about those sort of lines of separation that are sort of overlaid to form ripples, or again being subsumed back into the water as a natural force that would reclaim these.
Which leads beautifully to this work here, the lungs that are also trees.
Half Oxygen was really, again, a work about our sort of interdependence of the fact that the oxygen as a source of exchange between human and the natural habitat, and yet it is formed using the electric cable, both in this case and here, where as a medium it really began, I began working with it as points of connectivity, as information, as flows of information, and to think of this sort of really subterranean network of these roots or fungi and the exchange and communication between trees, where they not only exchange nutrients but chemical signals are passed through when there's danger, and to really think of how they have this sort of shared network which is sort of to nourish. And rivers do that, right? Rivers don't make distinctions between which side. They're constantly nourishing both banks.
The orientation of this map is really interesting. Reena, would you like to tell us a bit more about it?
Anatomy of distance, yeah. I mean, as you know, like I've been working on several sort of cartography has always interested me, and not just thinking about how we shape maps, but also how maps have shaped our perceptions of the world. And if you think of several projections of the map where no version of the map is really safe because it's a sphere when opened up, and while Mercator's projection is really the more established one because it was always used as a navigation tool. There have been historically several other ways in which, like East up maps as early Christian maps, or Islamic maps which were south up because Mecca was in the south and they would have liked to see it up there, and most countries are in the south. So I was sort of looking at this sort of unfamiliar geography that in a way also turns upside down. This is based on MacArthur's map, where so it sort of reorients our thinking about, say, the south, the global south vis-a-vis the north. But also for years I've been working with rubber stamps as a sort of bureaucratic device that it's an apparatus that both either endorses, legitimizes, gives state sanction, or stamps histories out of existence, or doesn't recognize people who are left on the margins. And so in this case they are names of those who are denied visas, and of course we know the denial of visa is often based on notions of class, gender, nationality, religion, and to think of these crisscrossing lines of those people who've moved or migrants today, and those histories of displacement.
Here we have pattern recognition. It's made like an eye chart, yes?
That's right. Yeah, I've been working with several renditions of the eye chart as something that, of course, you know, it's a play on how we see things, our vision, and so usually there were constitutions of countries where each alphabet here is sort of replaced by maps. So it's essentially about reading maps, but how do you really read and understand the world in a way where I was actually looking at data during the pandemic where there were far more restrictions and regulations on the movement of people, and that got me interested into looking at the strength of passports and how that has changed depending on several factors of which countries have more access and the sort of inequities of movement and I started really looking back at data from 2006 where, say, Denmark, Finland, US and you know, Italy, Germany, France, and they were all high up on the position UK, and then to because that sort of gave you the number of countries that each of those have access to. And going down all the way, you see Afghanistan, even India is like low on that scale. And here in 2023, how that has changed, because if you look at Japan and Singapore, South Korea, you just realize that the shift in the Asian countries now being you know, sort of dominating on that. So it's again about this play of perception, of legibility, of of official archives, but also about bureaucratic means in which people traverse and those sort of restrictions.